I'm going to stamp our sheath with this custom made stamp. It's got my company's name, Fox Ridge Arms, and my signature. And we're going to stamp it on the back. If you had commercially available stamps that you wanted to do decorations with, this would be the time to do that too. We've moistened our leather. We've let it set 5 minutes, so it's now cased. We're going to lay this thing down flat. We're going to find where we think our belt loop's going to end, and we're going to stamp kind of right below that. And this stamp has a little piece on the, there's a little rough place on the inside here, so you can tell where you're at as far as what's supposed to be up. And we're going to use it. And that's what the stamp looks like. My stamp. I'll make a video one day of where to get these from, and they're originally reasonably expensive, but once you have it, I use it for my knives and my leather, so it'll do steel or leather. So, all right. So once we've got our stamping done, we got to work on our, make sure that our outside shape is what we're wanting. Prior to doing our stamping, we want our outside shape to be 100% of what we want, so we know where to put the stamps. And we're getting pretty close to that. I mean, we're going to do a little more tweaking on it, but it's getting pretty close, looking pretty good. We got a little bit of an edge there to work with the sew. We're going to sew our piece on the back here. Prior to sewing, we're going to let this thing dry again, or dry out. We've moistened it to stamp it and to make it kind of fold and start forming into shape. We're going to let this thing dry overnight, and we're going to come back and we're going to work on some of this little bit of a hairy part here. Some leather will have more of this than others, but I'll show you a couple little tricks to do where you can get rid of most of that. And it's just the nature of the leather. I mean, that's just how it is. Some leathers have very little of that, some have right much of it. So we'll show you how to treat it, and we've given you the stuff to do that with in your kit. As you can see, our leather has a few little hairs sticking off of it here. All we're going to do is just flatten it out and take our little piece of sandpaper and just knock down the most of that. Just knock it down where it'll not show so much. And that's why we put your little piece of sandpaper in there, to do the edges and to do this little hairy bit of stuff. Cut it like a stop sign, so it's got some little points on it. So you take your sandpaper and you just round those points off. The more times you cut, like if you go to like 16 cuts, the points are really small, and that's not a problem just to sand them off. You can sand them off at even 8 corners. Not a big thing. And you're just making this, I'm just going to bevel the edge with this sandpaper and just kind of rounding it. That's all I want to do, is round that a little bit. And we're going to do it down here on this edge. We're not going to do this part just yet. We're just going to do around our belt loop and around the front edge. The places that are hard to do once we get it together. So we're just going to do that a little bit. Make those look good. Make this corner look good. And we're not sanding the top grain of our leather. We're trying not to sand that. We're wanting that to be not scratched up. That's bad. So we're just sanding the edges, and we're just beveling the edge a little bit. so that it feels good in the hand. And you could actually skip this entire step, not a necessary step. Just knocking the corners off of that, making sure this hasn't got any big gouges in it. I got a little gouge right there. So I'm going to take my sandpaper and work on that little gouge. That's where I cut it and stopped cutting and started cutting again. And it's best if you just make one long cut. Keeps you from having those. But if you got any of those, just hit them with sandpaper. Not a problem. And then we can just... And once you did this, the initial sanding, you can always use this a piece of paper or even the back of the sandpaper, and we can burnish this a little bit, and it'll make it a little smoother and lay the fibers down a little bit, so that it feels more like what you would find in a bought item. And this will work just with a piece of copy paper if that's what you have. And so we're going to look at our sheath here and make sure that's everything looking right. And then we'll lay it in here and see where we got to trim at the bottom. We'll trim it right there at the bottom. And that's kind of what we're after. Something like that. And we'll put our knife in here and make sure that's going to be what we want. And our knife's going to go in about there, so we can get a hold of our handle good. And we may cut just a little bit more off. Make it go in a little tighter. So that's what we're after. Check our knife again. Like that. Alright. And so in our kit, in the directions, it gives you a leather dye. It's called vinegaroon. You can make it. It's really easy to make. You can look up other dyes that are kind of homemade dyes for leather. You can use tea, you can use coffee, you can use walnut husks, pecan husks. I'm going to use a professional oil dye, and that's what I have, and that's what I like. You don't have to dye it at all. This is a tan color. It's perfectly fine just the way it is. I've taken the last few minutes and I've worked on my little whelp here, and I've gotten it to where it fits in here correctly. My knife will go slide in and out. When I squeeze it down like it's sewn, it feels good on the knife. It's to the point. I've taken some time and I've made sure that it's up and down, and it's okay at this point if you have to slide this thing over a little bit or up a little bit. This outside shape is not set in stone yet. We're going to work on that. So if your whelp is a little off, it's okay if it comes in or sticks out, depending on what you need it to do. Nobody's going to see this part except you at this point. Up here at this top, I generally make it curve in, so as the knife is coming in, it can follow that. If it's square across or up, it's going to give you something to hang on. So I generally round that corner. I generally set it up as if I can so that it lines up on the edge more or less, and then I will draw a line in here, draw a line right through here, and because we're going to glue these two pieces together right here initially, we're also going to glue this belt loop down, and I use rubber cement. You can buy it at the hardware store. Super glue will work. Whatever kind of glue you got to work. Gorilla Glue, the stuff that you got to wet your item to make it work, I would avoid that because you don't want to wet your leather at this point. That you can actually drill the holes or punch the holes and then try to sew it with it all 3 pieces loose, and that's more problematic. If you got some kind of glue, like I said, rubber cement is usually what we use on leather. But if you don't have that, super glue will work. And so that's what I'm going to do at this point. I'm going to go and I'm going to lay this down in here and get this just the way I want it, and I'm going to draw me a line because I do not want to put glue on this stuff. I only want to put the glue on underneath here. I don't want it all out here, so that's why we're drawing lines. And we'll probably even flip this over and draw a line on that side, so because eventually we'll glue that to this too. And we're going to do flesh side to flesh side. If you get a really high-end knife, sometimes they'll thin this down here closer to the bottom because the handle needs to be fatter and the blade is thinner, of course. Not necessary. If you feel around on your piece of leather, once you get your sheath cut out, sometimes you can find a piece that's tapered a little bit and use that to cut your whelp. Not a necessary thing though, but the high-end sheaths, we do skype them down there a little bit and make them thinner as they go. But we're just going to draw our lines here. And I'm just using a pen. Nobody's going to see this, so it doesn't matter. And we're going to flip this over. And draw it on this side if we can get it lined up in here. And before I draw it, I'm going to check to make sure I'm not seeing that piece. Yeah, I'm not seeing that piece. We don't want to see the top edge of this piece on our leather. So we're going to make sure that that's in. And so basically that's what you got. You can trim this piece off as much as you want down here at the bottom. I generally don't make it crazy tight in there because if there's any moisture gets in there, say it's raining or what have you, it'll give it a place to run out of and not just, if you do this real tight, it will hold water at least some. I generally leave it open at the bottom so if it does get any water in it, it'll have a place to go. So you can check your sheath at this point, put all your pieces together, and you can look, see I'm pretty dead tight on that when this is lined up. So I'm going to cut a little bit more off that bottom. So that when we put this in here, we see a little gap. That's what I'm after, is a little gap there at the bottom. Alright, and so at this point we're also going to turn this around and we can see where our line is here. We may have to stitch, we're going to stitch this belt loop on prior to us gluing this piece on, and that way it won't bother us. It won't be in our way. So we're going to line our belt loop up. I don't pay attention to this side, that's not set in stone, but this fold here is. So get that lined up the way you're going to have it. And then you can kind of center your, center your belt loop on that. And I try to make this side parallel with this straight edge here. And I will scoot back a little bit from where I want it to be actually, and then I'll draw me a little bit of a line here. I'm going to cover this line up so I don't want it to be too big. And so when I put it in the right place, it'll be covered up. And so I'm just going to take it and just draw us a little bit of a spot here to do a few stitches in, and just make sure that it's covering up. Might get it a little straighter than that. There you go. And it basically looks like your thumbnail. It's round on the bottom and straight across the top. So what I do. You can make it a triangle, you can make it a couple straight lines, whatever you choose to do, you certainly can. And so prior to us stitching this and gluing this, we're gonna put our die on the outside. And I'm gonna use dark brown. It's a Foreign Beast dark brown. You get this at Tandy Leather, you can get it at Weaver Leather. Any of those places will have it. And in your kit, I put you in a couple of the daubers like this. And that's why I put them in. If you want to buy your dye, that's fine. Or if you want to make your dye, the dauber still works good for that. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to get us a good clean spot so we're not rubbing hairy stuff in our dye. And we're going to go ahead and dye this piece. And we want to dye it down in here a little bit. We're trying to stay off of where we're going to glue, but we want to come down in here. We're going to go, but we don't want to dye all of this inside. That's not necessary. You're just wasting your dye. So we're going to go ahead and shake this up a smidge. This will dye your fingers, so keep that in mind. And we're going to need us a rag here in a minute. Let me get my rag. Too far gone. Just a cotton cloth, an old t-shirt, a sock, whatever you got. Because we're going to wipe off the dye to make it an even color. So we're going to just kind of squish it down. This is the dark brown, Foreign Beast dark brown. And we're going to go ahead and roll on with this stuff. The faster you do this, the better it is. Wherever you stop and start is where you're going to have problems. So we want to go ahead and get this on here. I kind of make circles with it. Try not to have runs in it. That's going to show. It's a little harder to do this. The stiff leather is hard to do. Because it wants to flat back up on you. So we're going to do circles. And the idea with this is get this thing pretty wet with this dye so it'll be all one color. Alright, and once we get your dye on, then we're going to wipe this. I generally wipe in one direction. And you're trying to look and see if you got any spots that have a little less. See that spot there? It's got a little less dye on it. And so we come back, we get those spots again. It's usually around the edges, at least for me. And we'll go ahead and do a whole nother coat on this deal. And the leather is super dry at this point. I've let this dry for like 2 weeks. It's been 2 weeks since we worked on this. I was busy. But it's super dry at this point. That's what we were looking for. We don't want it to be moist like when we wet it to, come on now. And we're just looking for a consistent color and that it's all been dyed. Worst thing to do is once you get it all together, then you say, oh, I missed a spot dyeing it, because it's real hard to dye it after it's together. Now what we're going to do is we're going to run the edges that are going to be permanent edges now. This section here is not done yet, so we're just going to run the edges that are for sure, and we're going to make sure that we're not running, at least on the outside. We don't want it to run. Like that's, we don't want to have a spot that's more dye than, or less dye than any other spot. So I'm going to go back and look at it again. Okay, now on the inside, we're going to dye this as one section, if we can. And the inside will take more dye, and you've got to make the little circles, especially on the inside, to get it down into little hairy parts. And this will take more dye than the outside. And we're going to stay off of our line there that we're going to glue. But we are going to go down in here a little bit, maybe 2 inches, 2.5, because people can see down in your sheath, so that's why we're dyeing the inside. And we'll just make it go along those lines, and we'll put 2 coats on this here, because you are going to see this. This will be part of the sheath that you definitely see. So again, we're going to take our rag and we're going to wipe any excess off and make sure we don't have it running on the back or on the front, in fact. Okay. And we're just looking at it to make sure we got it like we want it. And be sure to get all the little corners and the edges. Okay. Now what we're going to do is we're going to let that dry a few minutes. Alright, our dyes, the next day our dye on our leather sheath is complete. It's completely dry. We marked a little spot here on our sheath. We're going to take our little scratch awl here and we're going to scratch up that spot so that we have some place for our glue to adhere. So maybe you can see it. And we're going to scratch up on this side too a little bit. These are top grain. Whenever you have top grain and you're trying to glue it, typically you want to scratch that up some, get it some surface area for the glue to stick. And the glue we're using is contact cement You could use super glue, you could use other types of glue. I would not suggest Gorilla type glue. In the order that you do this is important. Like we're putting on our belt loop at this point. That's the order we need. We don't want to put on our whelp just yet due to the whelp will be in the way of our stitching for this portion of it. So we're gonna glue this and we're gonna punch it and we're gonna stitch this part and then we'll put the whelp on. And we just want to make sure that the glue is not going to run on our leather. That's not what we want. So we kind of got to flatten it out a little bit to try to keep it from running. You don't need a whole lot of glue, so it shouldn't run, but we're going to give it about 5 minutes. Alright, we're going to stick this down. It's been about 5 minutes. We're just going to try to make certain that we're getting all of our glue on our part that'll be seen covered up, and that we're sticking it on here reasonably straight. And we're going to stick it down and we're going to hold it for just a second or two, make sure that stuff stays, and squish this a little bit, make sure that's not pulling it apart for us. And so we've got our place there glued down now, reasonably straight with our side here. Alright. Now, I have here a punch board. That's ideal, but since we've given you so much leather, this is another option, and that's what we're going to use. We're going to use a scrap piece. This is the same leather that we cut our sheath out of, and we're just going to use that as our punch board. Just a very common thing to do, and all we're looking to do is just make kind of a straight line across the back and then around the edge in a semicircle, and have it evenly spaced from the edge. Couple ways you can do that. You can draw it with a pen. If you don't mind seeing the pen marks, you can draw it with a pen. What I'm going to do is I'm going to scratch it with our little, this is the nail that came in your kit. We're going to use this for a couple of things. We're going to use it to draw with, and we're going to use it to punch the holes all the way through. So I'm just going to use it's a little finger trick where you hold the nail and your other finger at some kind of distance here and keep that the same, and as you come around it will keep that distance. So we're going to do that. We're just going to start up here, and we're just going to kind of, don't have to be much of a mark, just a little something for you to guide by. I would like to have just a little guide. It makes it look a little better. And so we just got a little bit of a mark. And as far as straight across, I generally don't worry about that. When we put our pricking iron up here, we can get straight across pretty easy. Alright, so I generally start with our straight across mark, and so we're going to put it on here, lining it up straight as we can get it. And we're going to tap it down, and again, we're not trying to drive this thing all the way through our leather. This is too thick a leather for what our pricking iron is made for. Pricking irons are made for light and leather. And so we're going to just use it to mark our holes. Alright, there's our straight line. And I hooked one of the iron's points into the last hole as I go down. You can either hook it in the hole or you can slide it over equally spaced. You want it to be evenly spaced around here, so you got to get it so it looks right. And so I'm going to hook it into this. Well, this time I might just evenly space it down here. And we're going to try to keep on our little scratch line best we can. Alright. And I do this side as well. The lighting in here is not good today. And you kind of do all what you can with the pricking iron. And in my case, I generally don't worry if it's perfectly round. It's alright for me to look like a church window as long as it's looking even. And so that's what we're going to do. And so there's our little prick marks. I hope y'all can see that lighting is not good. So we've got our start. We've got our mark started. Now all we're going to do is we're going to take our nail. Excuse me. We're going to take our nail and we can either drive it through with a hammer or we can put it into a cordless drill. If you have a cordless drill, that would probably be ideal. And when I send this nail out to you, if you know anything about nails, nails usually come in their sharp, like got sharp little ears on both sides. Not just a pointed sharp, it's like extra sharp places up the side. I generally take and run that on the sander and take those sharp places off. If you want to use a bigger nail or a different nail, take your sandpaper that we give you in your kit and just sand those sharp edges off of your nail. You don't want your nail cutting your leather. You want your nail to push the fibers of the leather apart. So that's the goal, is we want it to push it apart. Now, you put it in the drill and spin it, it's still pushing it apart. It just does it a little easier and leaves your hole a little cleaner. But you certainly can drive this through. Again, we're using our piece of leather, our scrap piece of leather, so it's not damaging our tool and it's not damaging our surface. Now, this is a punch block, so it doesn't matter, but you certainly don't want to do this on your fine furniture. So this doesn't have to be any particular kind of hammer. I'm just going to use a metal hammer. It's a little cross peen, and the idea with this is hold your nail up straight as you can and drive it down just through, and you can tell that it's through, and then we're going to twist it and pull it back out, and we may have to wiggle it a little bit to do that. There it comes. And so that's our first hole. Right there's our hole. And you can see when we drew our line, that's why we're doing this section first. If we had glued on this whelp here, it would be in our way. So I'm going to take a few minutes and I'm just going to drive these nail holes on through here, these prick marks on through. Alright, I've punched these with the nail and with the hammer just across here, and I'm going to go ahead and do some others with the drill, show you how that looks. And we didn't cut the head off of our nail because we can use it later to drive with it again if we want to. The inside of your chuck here, when it bites down on something, it doesn't go all the way in. So if you put the nail in and start tightening your chuck up, you can tighten it up with the head of the nail in your drill. You don't have to cut the head of it off. So if you want to, you can, but I suggest not doing that. And we're going to make sure we're drilling straight. And the advantage of the drill is it's easier to pull it back out. And you just want to make sure that you're going all the way through. With the hammer, it's easier to tell that you're through. But the drill goes much faster. as you can see. Alright, I'm going to finish drilling this and I'll bring you back.